Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook for August through November. This is Gina Palma. Currently across the Great Basin, we still have several large fires across the region up in Idaho, down in Nevada, and Utah, and we continue to see light to moderate initial attack each day from lightning across the region. Also, we will be having very dry air spread all the way across the Great Basin, so we are expecting holdovers to pop up as well. Great Basin remains at Peel 3, at least as of July 31st, and Nick is at Peel 5. Over the last 30 days, we've seen very warm temperatures across the interior west, especially the eastern half of the Great Basin, where we saw temperatures 5 to 10 degrees above normal on average. However, we saw many heat waves across the Great Basin throughout the month. Precipitation was also a mix. We saw very dry conditions remain over southern Nevada and over parts of central Idaho, but we did have monsoon moisture pushes across the Great Basin, which did bring some above normal precipitation to the Arizona Strip, parts of Utah, especially in the higher elevations, the northern half of Nevada, and parts of central Idaho and western Wyoming. Looking at the percent of average precipitation dating back to the beginning of the water year, October 1st, and we largely see below normal precipitation across the region from both the dry winter and the dry spring we've been seeing moving into the region, with the exception of around the peripheries where we saw some areas of near or above normal precipitation. We also are still dealing with our very low snowpack that we had this winter, both in our current fuel moisture, the health of our fuels across the Great Basin, and also the grass crop over southern Idaho that was not compacted by snow. So this snowpack is still very relevant. That plays a role into our current fire season and where we will go from here. Soil moisture still remains very low across interior portions of the Great Basin. Looking at our drought conditions, we still have severe to extreme drought over a large portion of the Great Basin and still an area of exceptional drought over southern Idaho. The only areas that either don't have any drought or just abnormally dry conditions are parts of central Idaho and southwest Nevada. Looking at our drought outlook, which takes us through the end of October, we are expecting some improvements over the eastern half of the region, assuming we still get the above normal monsoon precipitation that we're expecting. So again, take this with a grain of salt because we will need quite a bit of precipitation to overcome some of these deficits. Otherwise, over the western half of the Great Basin, drought will likely persist or intensify. Now looking at days since precipitation, days since any amount of precipitation is over on the left, and you can see many of the areas have seen at least some light amounts of precipitation in the last week. There are some exceptions in southern Nevada and even western Utah and a small part of southern Idaho that haven't seen any precipitation in the last 1 to 2 months or longer. Now looking at days since wetting rains, so days where we've had 1/10 of an inch or more of precipitation, and the picture is a little bit different. We definitely have many pockets that haven't seen those heavier amounts of rainfall in Nevada, Utah, and even in southern Idaho. So it's really these heavier amounts of rain that are needed for longer periods of time to really make a difference in a lot of our fuel conditions, as you'll see going forward. So a quick look about a week ago is the image here on the left was our ERC percentile map, and then fast forward to where we are now on the right. Big changes just in the last week. We did have a couple pushes of monsoon moisture. One was fairly significant in July, where it really lasted about 10 days or longer in many areas of the eastern half of the Great Basin. However, that moisture still being spotty in nature with the thunderstorms really just did not have a great effect on our fire potential and fire behavior. It did decrease some areas, at least somewhat, but we were still getting fires to pop up and even large fires in some of these areas where the ERCs were indicating lower fire danger. So again, as we move through August, we are expecting very hot temperatures in the early part of the month with very dry conditions and relative humidity in the single digits, almost region-wide. So we will see this picture on the right. If we fast forward a week into the end of the first week in August, we'll likely see all areas above the 90th percentile. Now looking at our trends for each specific region, for Idaho and Wyoming, fire danger ERCs are already above the 80th to 90th percentile, but you can see from all of the charts really skyrocketing with this heat and dryness moving in. So most areas will be above the 90th and likely above the 97th percentile within the next week. Our fire activity and fuels conditions are scattered across Idaho. We do have some larger fires, the Tartar and the Big Grass Fire that moved in from Oregon, which have some larger acreage. And then we also continue to see initial attack across the region where many of these fires across southern eastern Idaho have grown to over 1,000 or 3,000 acres. So we're still seeing fires ignitions, and we're still seeing growth in many of these areas. Western Wyoming did see a little bit more moisture, so their fire behavior was a little bit more moderated with just a lot of single tree fires. But again, their fire danger will be rising as well. And we're also still seeing sagebrush live fuel moisture drop across the region despite any moisture we've seen recently. Looking at Nevada, most of Nevada is also above the 80th to 90th percentile, and we will continue seeing these rapid rises going through the next week as well. We have a couple of large fires still in Nevada, the New Pass and Quail Springs, which were active at the end of July. We still have fires that continue to pop up over the eastern side of the state, so we'll likely see more large fires going forward into August. Across Utah and the Arizona Strip, a little bit more of a patchwork of higher and lower ERC values, but again, in the Fish Lake, where ERC values were actually below the 70th percentile or near the 70th percentile when Widemouth 2 started. So we are still seeing fires, at least new ignitions and growth in some of these areas that would indicate lower fire danger. So that is definitely noteworthy, and with conditions only expected to get worse as fire danger rises rapidly. So again, looking at our fuels conditions and our fire activity, a lot of initial attack across Utah. Widemouth 2 was the only large fire of any significance here in the last week, just with the moisture that we did receive, but still a lot of initial attack, and we do expect that to increase with the better potential of larger fires and fire spread as we go into August with the very dry conditions. We also have reports of ponderosa die-off down across the Arizona Strip, and again, fuel moisture still remain low. So now that we've looked at where we've come from and what's happening so far, we'll look at what we're expecting here over the next few months. So El Nino has developed and continues to strengthen. And we do see most of our impacts from El Nino in the winter months, but we do see some impacts in the summer as well. Typically, in an El Nino, we see more West Coast troughs that move in, either giving us lightning events in the northwest and northern part of the Great Basin with short waves, or a little bit more wind than normal. We also tend to see more lightning overall across the Great Basin, but usually with higher amounts of lightning, there's usually a better chance of moisture or a mix of wet and dry storms, which is what we have been seeing so far with any pushes of the monsoon. We typically see very hot temperatures in the west, which is what we have been experiencing, and a very erratic monsoon. I know the monsoon has been advertised to be quite robust this year, and it's been very erratic. We've seen moisture move in that did last a week or two in the Great Basin, and that had some effect on our fuels, but now it's dried out and the monsoon will actually be suppressed heading into early August. So again, expect those conditions to continue. Looking at the strength of El Nino, really all of the models, or nearly all of them, are pushing El Nino into this very strong status as we go through later in the summer and the fall, and looks like El Nino continuing into the winter months and even potentially next spring. So now a quick look at our sea surface temperatures. The box here is along the equator, which is the sea surface temperatures that we look at to classify El Nino, and you can see the rapid warming occurring within that box. So again, El Nino has already established itself and just will continue strengthening. Now a quick look at the broader Pacific, because other areas of the ocean definitely have some influence as well. And we'll kind of focus first on these areas in these boxes. So a week or about a month ago, and in late June, you can see up here in the top left image, we had very, very warm water along the equator, some warm water in the North Pacific, and a lot of cool water along the West Coast and along the coast of Alaska. This would put us a little bit more into a negative PDO phase, which is Pacific Decadal Index, so another oceanic index across the region. And typically, when we see an El Nino developing, especially a strong one, we end up in this positive PDO phase, which we're just not seeing. We're seeing a lot of cool water still along the coast, which would again be that negative phase. So the fact that these are out of phase definitely has an implication on our weather, and it's just a little bit more of an unusual El Nino year than what we would normally see. But looking at the differences in the last month, we are starting to see maybe a little bit of warming of these waters along the West Coast, which would possibly start to tip that PDO bucket back in the positive phase, which would be more traditional, accompanied with an El Nino. And you can see in the El Nino region along the equator how much these sea surface temperatures have strengthened just in the last month. So now looking at the outlooks from the Climate Prediction Center, this is for the month of August, showing above normal temperatures and above normal precipitation in a large portion of the Great Basin. I will say heading through the first 8 to 12 days of August, this is probably not a likely scenario, and we may see some moisture creeping into southern areas of the Great Basin initially in August before we see any type of a push north. So I would definitely take this with a grain of salt, and really any above normal precipitation, I feel a little bit more confident in the far south. So we'll see how far north that extends, but I would anticipate at least for the first half of the month, drier conditions on the western and northern periphery. And then the 3-month outlook from September through November, continuing with this above normal temperature signature in the west, and then the potential for above normal precipitation in the Four Corners area, but still drier across the northern Great Basin into the northwest. And this is a more traditional El Nino type scenario where we see wetter conditions down in the southwest, Southern California, and drier conditions in the northwest into the northern Rockies. So we'll see if this materializes or if there are any other atmospheric effects that contribute to a different scenario. But that's quite a bit down the road. So putting everything together, we're still expecting above normal fire potential across a large portion of the Great Basin, across the northern 2/3 of the region. So again, as we get into early August, we're expecting very hot and dry conditions region-wide, which should allow holdovers to start popping up. And certainly if we see any new fires, there'd be a better potential for growth with the very dry conditions. Probably as we get into the end of the first week in August, we may start to see some of that moisture creep into the far south. And this might give us actually more initial attack and higher fire potential initially before the moisture moves in. But we are expecting the moisture to move into southern areas. So I think if we do see any increase in activity in the south, it would just be very early in the month, and then we should start to see those areas taper off. But again, it's going to take quite some time before that fire potential across the northern half of the region really starts to modify. As we get into September, that above normal area is pushed a little bit further north, and we'll continue to watch the moisture to see if any of these areas in red really get any significant precipitation, but it will take quite some time. Then by October and November, we are expecting a return to normal fire potential. The only caveat I will say is we are still watching areas in southern Idaho, possibly far northeast Nevada and northern Utah, where our fine fuel loading is well above normal in the lower elevations. If we do stay on the drier side through August and September, we could be worried about those areas as strong cold fronts in the fall start to drop south. That typically starts happening in September, but if it continues into October after a dry trend, we may have to introduce some above normal. But right now, it's just confidence is too low to add something like that at this time. But it is something we're monitoring. And then normal conditions for the month of November. That concludes our seasonal outlook for this month. Please check back next month for the latest updates.